mental health speaks about your emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It is about well-being. And people who are mentally healthy, they tend to be generally happy people, living content lives and productive lives, and maintaining healthy relationships. A mental illness is a condition that affects someone's thinking or their emotional functioning or their behavior. Mental illness can be caused by a variety of factors. There is no one thing that causes a mental illness. It's no one's fault, it's no one factor. So often it's a combination of biopsycho and social factors. And by that I mean part of it could be genetic or biological. Part of it might be a person's ability to cope with stressors and what's going on in their lives. Part of it might be coming from the environment. So it could be stresses from the environment, like their family relationships, what's going on at work. They may have encountered an event or an experience that is traumatic or that threatens their ability to handle a situation. And all of these things can manifest in a mental illness. A stressor is anything. It could be something, it could be an event, it could be an experience that threatens your sense of well-being, that threatens your equilibrium, and is a challenge for you to cope with. There's a great amount of stigma and prejudice and discrimination faced by people with mental illness. One of the things about a mental illness is because it's a very personal thing and it relates to your thinking and your behavior and emotions, many times people feel it's personal, it's something you are doing or you are not doing. So our tendency is to blame the person and not the illness. And so that perpetuates a lot of stigma and discrimination.
I've been suffering with depression since I was 14 years old. At first I didn't understand it. I just felt sad a lot. I thought it would pass. However, days turned into weeks and weeks into months and months into years. It was like a constant baggage that I had to carry. But how could emptiness feel so heavy? When I was 16, I finally decided to tell someone. Who better to tell than my mother? I rattled it all out. Sleepless nights, why I hardly socialized or even attended family events, my suicidal thoughts, my need for a psychiatrist, but my efforts were futile. She just couldn't grasp my feelings of despair.
Babes, what you have to be sad about? Ever buy the new phone last week? Don't psychiatrist. That's for crazy people. What the family go take? Take a sleep, you go feel better.
The stigma for my depression permeated into all my relationships. When I was 21, I met this really sweet girl named Jennifer. She was always so happy. But in hindsight, I probably hoped that her happiness would rub off on me. On one of our dates, she was so excited about her internship in France and all the adventures it would entail. But it was just one of those dark days that I was having, and I continuously brushed her off. Let's just put it this way, it didn't end too well.
So guess what? I got the internship in France. I'm so excited to go and I can't wait. Are you as excited as I am? I'm really excited to go. What's wrong?
Nothing.
I don't understand.
Nothing.
My mother really said you were crazy, you know.
No.
I really can't take this anymore. You can't be excited for me. I'm gone. Bye.
I'm good.
Even my work life was suffering, and my boss just wasn't having my excuses. So I finally confided in him, but his snide comments continued. You just can't imagine living like this.
Mr. Thomas, you are late again. Have a seat. What is going on with you?
Nothing.
This is the third time this week you are late. What is going on?
Nothing.
Do you want me to call the Maros? We know you're not right up there. Do you want me to call the Maros and help you with your work?
No.
Just take your files and get the work done. Please take it. Go. Please go.
Great, thanks.
one of the negative stereotypes we have in our culture is we tend to think of the mentally ill person as somebody who's unpredictable and violent and likely to act out at any time. And this is a very harmful stereotype because it deters people from wanting to seek help. They're fearful of being judged, they're fearful of being treated differently, they're fearful of being shunned and ostracized. And so people often will not admit that they're struggling, and it even deter them from seeking help because they're also fearful of what the repercussions might be in their workplace and in the wider social relationships. So stigma and discrimination is a very big issue, and it can affect people in all spheres of their life. You know, one of the things that many people with mental illness are fearful of is that they might be negatively affected in their workplace. So they're afraid to disclose lest they lose their jobs or their job role gets changed, etc. So I think that's one area that the legislation can address, which is protection for people in the workplace and in other spheres. It can address those things that compromise people's human rights. We also have some obsolete laws on our books. I call them obsolete because I think they have no reason to be here in 2018. So for example, the Immigration Act that prohibits persons with mental illness, and it speaks about particular mental illnesses. So we can just strike those. I don't know what is involved, but I think that's where legislators and people in the legal community can focus some of their attention by making sure that protection is afforded if you have a mental illness, that you are not going to be denied your entitlements where human rights are concerned.
No one is safe from mental illness. Listen to these 3 students recount their struggle.
Have you ever experienced any mental illnesses? They range from anxiety, depression to bipolar disorder.
I have anxiety and depression.
You care to elaborate more?
Sure. I suffered an anxiety attack late last year and earlier this year, and it was mostly panic attacks where I was shaking violently, and I told my parents, told my relatives, we went to several doctors, got treatment that only lasted that day, was basically injections.
Experience anxiety, and this is a mental illness I cope with on a day-to-day basis.
Being a medical student, there are a lot of different pressures that they put us through in terms of the workload, the long hours, and clinical settings, and having to deal with some of the emotions of not only the patient but the relatives of the patient. So sometimes a lot of it actually gets you, and you internalize it at some points, and sometimes more than others. For example, like after the passing away of one of my patients, we got the breaking news to one of our family members, and it was good up at that point, and then when they actually started breaking down in front of us, at the time I had to try to keep a straight face, but afterwards it affected me for a few times, for weeks and weeks afterwards, just replaying the moment over and over in your head, and just it was a tough time to get through. But I mean, I think it's natural in this field to have to go through those kind of things, and so yeah, that happens. So I think it's just part of everyday life.
The doctors and everybody else was like trying to figure out what is my trigger, and I do not have a trigger.
I see.
So they determined it was EMDD, which was related to premenstrual dysfunction.
My biggest stressor is not being prepared, or the feeling of not being prepared for assignments or preparation for examinations or even trial advocacy. Anxiety gives a person the feeling of doom and a sense of stress. So as a result, there are many ways that I try to cope with this feeling of doom and anxiety.
According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Trinidad and Tobago also holds a constitution which provides for the equality of treatment for all and for freedom from discrimination. Unfortunately, persons with mental health issues often find their rights infringed. Persons who suffer from mental illnesses experience discrimination and violations of their basic rights due to the stigma attached to their ailment. The Equal Opportunity Act is progressive in accounting for the discrimination faced by those suffering from mental illness. A mental or psychological disease or disorder is included within the scope of the disabilities to which it applies. It prohibits discrimination in relation to employment, education, and the provision of goods, services, and accommodation once that discrimination is on the ground of status, by victimization, or through offensive behavior. However, some laws still enforced in Trinidad and Tobago are much less forward-thinking and differ greatly from the current worldview of how such issues should be treated. These archaic enactments of legislation not only violate persons who suffer from mental illnesses' human rights, but their derogatory terminology dates back to a time where these persons were freely ridiculed. And their existence in legislation today does nothing but help perpetuate such stigma.
There's a lot we could do at the individual level. So not everybody needs to be a public advocate or to be part of a charity group, but we can do things in our personal lives. And one of those things, it could be about just having more conversations about mental health. If we free up the discussion of mental health, it's not taboo. It's not something that people have to struggle with alone. It is something that affects so many of us. If we help to normalize that conversation. And also, if you see somebody who's struggling, reaching out to them. Say, how are you doing today? I haven't heard from you much recently.